The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to the Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couturi, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
Nice one, Sam. Welcome to the Winemakers.
Really? That's it? Like,
yeah.
Nice one, Sam.
Nice one, Sam. Aloha.
Yeah,
and,
aloha.
Buenos tardes, dias.
Hola.
Hola.
Hola and aloha. Really, they're basically the same word. Just a couple extra letters.
Yeah. Everyone's sort of back from vacation. Well, except John. John hopefully is in France lining up some guests for us in Bordeaux and Burgundy.
And Loire Valley. And
a sponsorship to get us all over there.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We don't even need guests. I'll just take the sponsorship.
Right, exactly. Oh, we left the recording equipment home.
Oops.
And we are joined by Lance Cutler, a.k.a. Jake Lorenzo, on the show.
Just jumping right into the... jumping right into the alias.
There was a time where we didn't say who Jake Lorenzo was, right, Lance?
Yeah, but once I started selling books, it was important for people to know who the hell it was.
You got to know who to write the check out to.
That's right.
Well, Lance, welcome.
Thank you.
You know, I, of course, first heard your name when I first got into business, and you were, I believe, still at Gun Bun. Correct? What year did you?
I started there in 1978.
Okay.
And I was completely gone by 95.
Okay. So yeah, you were definitely still there in the mid 80s. And then I'd met you a number of times because certainly used to kind of run around with some of the characters that I worked with. But then
there weren't that many characters to run around with around those days.
There weren't.
Right? It was just like these were the characters of Sonoma Valley.
But we ran a lot harder.
There was a lot of running. It was hard running.
Well, and then, you know, my real introduction was the first Cellar Rats Ball, which I was like, now this is how you celebrate the end of a harvest. And that was that a you or was that a Wine Patrol?
It was me.
Yeah.
It, I believe the first one coincided with the murder of Tracy Tuvey.
Yeah, I forgot.
And we were trying to raise money to help Kathy and the kids. And I got Norton to sing and do that.
Norton Buffalo.
Norton Buffalo.
Yeah.
And,
Loving in the Valley
we
of
had
the Moon.
a lot of people. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people. And it was set up if your hands were black from crush or if you wore your boots, you got in for free. And a lot of the girls who were cellar rats not only wore boots, but put on gowns.
Oh,
It was cool. It was really nice.
And where was this at?
The Vets building in Sonoma, the first one. I did two of them. And then I went to all the wine association and said, look, I can't swing the liability issue here. You know, I got people drinking and I need help. It's a smashing success. You know, we're getting people from all over the county and everything. And they wouldn't do it. So I stopped for 4 or 5 years. And then I felt, God, we got to bring this back. And we did it over at the driving range on Arnold.
Yeah, when Rob was there.
Yeah. And one of the great events that just happened simultaneously was a beer keg toss. When the first keg got emptied, everybody started throwing it, and we saw who could throw the farthest.
Yeah. And that was a full-size keg. That was before the pony kegs.
Yep.
That was my event that I went to, was that one. And I don't recall who won, but I do recall there was a keg being tossed around.
Yeah. I could see you tossing a keg, Bart.
Yeah, you know, I'm not that coordinated.
It's
I have the strength. I don't have the coordination.
Yeah, it is.
The
it's
hand
like,
eye.
you know, I can remember you try to do it kind of like as a discus thrower would do it. But if you're not on the right trajectory coming up and when you let go, you know, hopefully people aren't standing anywhere nearby.
Right.
Speaking of liability.
I'd watch out for the windshields.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lance, so what came first, winemaking or writing?
Probably the writing. Although when I was in L.A., before we moved up here, and we moved here in 77.
And what part of L.A.?
I grew up kind of Culver City, Venice, Santa Monica area.
Yeah, sure.
I lived at the ocean.
Yeah.
You know. But I was growing vegetables and stuff, and we were making wine down there. We'd drive out and buy grapes, and do all that.
Where would you buy the grapes?
I just went blank on where's the Southern California vineyards out there?
Santa Barbara? Oh,
No, you mean down by San Diego.
Yeah.
Oh, like Temecula.
Temecula.
We have friends in Temecula now.
Yeah, we'd go there and buy grapes and then drive them all the way out to the valley where there was a winemaking shop, and he'd let us use the crusher and everything, and then we'd haul it back to my house. And when I first started making wine, we would go to stores and get fruit that was rotting. And we'd cut off the rotten parts, chop it up, and our recipe was a pound of fruit, a pound of sugar, and a gallon of water. And we put that in an old Red Mountain gallon jug, put a balloon on top. It'd start to ferment and blow up the balloon, and when the balloon went down, we'd drink it. That was my first winemaking.
I love how he just says, when the balloon went down, we drink it.
Yeah.
Not that then we let it age for a little bit.
Barrel it down, we'd rack, return. No.
Worry about cleanliness. I mean, clarity. No.
No. We were just trying to get high.
That's fun, though. That was fun times, probably.
And see, down in college, I went to a school called Valley State then. Now it's called Cal State Northridge. And nobody knew this, but after Berkeley, it was the most radical campus in the country. We were also the first campus to develop a Black Studies and Mexican American Studies major. And I worked on that.
Wow.
We were very, very political, very anti-war. And it got to the point, after I got out of college, I was teaching in Watts and then East LA, and it was pretty rough. And I had just had a kid, and police were haranguing me and harassing me, and I said, I got to get out of here. And that's what drove us to come to Sonoma.
And what were they harassing you about?
Well, we were very active politically, and the police didn't like that.
Got it. So it wasn't because of your color of your skin or your beliefs. It was just because you were a radical. Well, I guess it was your beliefs.
Well, I was a radical, and I was hanging out with minorities.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Right. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it was still Jim Crow in the 60s.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow. And did you move directly to Sonoma County?
Yeah. Moved into a house on Mountain Avenue, lived there for 23 years, and then my landlord sold it, and I had to build a house because I couldn't afford anything else. And we've been there 24 years now.
Yeah.
We skipped a little part that I really kind of want to hear about in 1972 when your wife decided you want to travel around the world.
Our kid was 3.5. It wasn't that we wanted to travel. I was convinced, and I don't know why, that I would die before I was 30. And
with where you were and what was going on?
Most of my friends agreed with me.
Yeah.
And I told my wife, I have to go to Europe before I die. So I was 26, and I said, I got to go. And she went with me, and we left with a 3-year-old, and we tried to go around the world for a year on $2,800. And we got as far as the India-Pakistan border. A war broke out, and they closed the border. We couldn't afford to fly over, so we turned around and worked our way back. And we ended up being out 10 months. Our kid turned 4 in Kabul, Afghanistan.
Wow.
You know, we took local buses from Istanbul all the way over. It was
Well,
an
where are
adventure.
you staying when you're traveling around?
We'd stay in 50-cent hotels, and then once we got to Kabul, my dad was working there. So we had a house to stay in Kabul.
Well, and Kabul in the early 70s especially was kind of a happening place, right?
If you were a drug addict,
Well,
there was a lot of hacks and stuff like that. The Shah was still there. I mean,
right, but it was pre-Mujahideen and
Yes.
the Soviet invasion.
Oh, yeah.
It was, it was
not only that, it was the
safe.
largest poor country in the world. If 50% of all the children in Afghanistan died before they were 2,
Holy shit.
and 25% died before they were 12. So if an Afghan lived to be 12, only bullets could kill him. They had been exposed to everything.
Yeah.
And they were in a very strategic place. So every country in the world was sending aid. The Russians were building these new roads, which they used to invade the country later. The United States was doing education and setting up the schools. The Danish people were there setting up a radio station. All over the world, countries were there helping them. It was a fascinating place.
And you're only speaking English through your whole travels?
Well, I don't speak other languages fluently, but I'm very adept at picking up phraseology. So whatever country I was in, I was talking to people a little bit.
Yeah.
Even there. I don't remember any of that now, but yeah, they have Dari and Pashtun as 2 languages there. So I would get up in the morning. I was into photography then, and I'd take a local bus downtown and take pictures of people, although they basically didn't like that. So I developed pictures, took them back to the people that I had taken pictures of, like a tea salesman or a butcher. And once the people saw the pictures, they all wanted me to take theirs.
Right.
And I did that almost every day for 2 months. Just go in, wander around town, take photos of people, and I met a lot of people that way.
And were you developing the film yourself?
Yeah, the American school let me use their darkroom in exchange for taking all the yearbook pictures of the students.
Oh, man.
So I took all the pictures and developed them, and they put their yearbook together, but I was able to use my darkroom.
Yeah. Oh,
And I still have a big book of the photos I took from those days.
Wow.
Yeah. They're almost all headshots of people.
Yeah.
So
what was your favorite country that you guys went
Greece.
through? Greece.
Absolutely love Greece. Spent 2 weeks going and 2 weeks coming. And unfortunately, have never been back.
Huh.
I'd love to go back, but...
And what was your wine knowledge at this point, or where was wine on your radar as far as this?
When we took that trip, every place we went was a brewery. So we were learning how to drink wine, which you have to do to make drink beer to make wine, but we weren't into wine much.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool.
But that's 1972.
Right. And then, so after that, came back to Sonoma County. No.
Well, went back to L.A.
Went back to L.A.
And moved up here in 77.
Yep.
I was running a small private school on Spain Street. And summer came, I had no work, so I got a job at Gundlach Bundschu in the tasting room, which was open Saturday and Sunday for 4 hours. The Cabernet was $3.75 a bottle, the Merlot was $3.50, and I was being paid $3 an hour. And after summer, they asked if I would help out during harvest. So I would teach until about 3 o'clock and then go work at the winery until about midnight. And we were doing, 6,000 cases then. Almost all estate fruit.
And how come you started there? Did you know someone that was working there?
They hired me to do the tasting room.
Yeah.
And then we had met each other, and I was pouring homemade wines for him. So they said, well, he knows something about winemaking.
Right.
So that was 78. And in 81, John Merritt left, and I was the only guy that could keep the equipment running, so I became winemaker.
No shit. That's how it happened.
That's how it happened.
And so at the time, Jim was running the farming, or was his father still alive then?
Yeah, and what happened is, again, tragedy. There's all these tragedies. John Merritt was the winemaker, and he had a baby, and the baby fell in a pool and drowned.
Oh, shit.
And they went to the hospital to deal with the baby, And Jim's father went there, and he had a heart attack and died. So that was 81. And we didn't even make Gewürztraminer or Pinot that year because we were so screwed up with all this tragedy. We just couldn't get the grapes in for that.
Wow.
Wow.
And I had no idea how to make wine. I mean, I was making homemade wine and stuff, but I don't know how to run a winery. But I had a master's degree in curriculum
You were missing the whole bottling part, too. You guys, you were making wine and then just drinking it right away. So there was
that was in the beginning.
There was a whole step.
I learned how to do that.
Right.
But I was a curriculum development person. So you tell me what you want to learn, and I would figure out how to teach it to whomever you wanted to learn. Right. So I called all the professors at Davis, and the first one was Vern Singleton back in the day. And I said, Dr. Singleton, would you be willing to come to Sonoma and give a lecture on the effects of time and temperature on red wine fermentation? He said, sure. And then could you do another one on time and temperature on white wine? He said, absolutely. I said, here's the deal. You have 10 minutes to make your presentation.
Why?
And then there's going to be an hour and a half question and answer from the winemakers. And we held that on my porch. And Mary Edwards was there, Steve McCross, all 9 of the Bob Sessions, all the winemakers from Sonoma Valley were there. They loved it. Singleton loved it. The winemakers loved it. And we did that again with Kunke on microbiological stuff, and we did it with Bolton. And that one we actually did, because so many people wanted to come, we did that at Kenwood.
Okay.
And that was on heat stabilizing and cold stabilizing and stuff. And that's basically how I learned how to make a wine.
Wow. So what was the first vintage that you were a winemaker?
At Bundschu?
At Bundschu.
I worked there 78, 79, and 80, and was officially winemaker starting in 81 and stayed for 10 years. And I was also general manager of the place.
Is there any wine still around?
Yeah. In fact, 2 years ago, we went to New Orleans for the first time since COVID, and we had 3 wines from that period, and all of them were drinking.
Wow.
One was actually really good, but they were all drinkable. And most of the people drinking them were younger than the wines.
Right.
They were grandkids of our friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, not that we were making great wine in those days. They tended to be too tannic. We would get the grapes in and immediately add tartaric acid just to lower the pH. We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
But they held up pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's evident in a lot of those wines is because the acid was high and the alcohols weren't crazy. Things didn't go wrong in the vineyard microbiologically as often because you were picking earlier. And so the wines just tended to be a little more alive. And sometimes the alcohols would still sneak up.
It was well before, the getting things really, really ripe. And I unfortunately have to take some of the blame for that because I was the first guy who ever gave Helen Turley a job. And she came and worked at the winery and kind of changed the whole business for a while there.
Yeah.
In what ways?
She was one of the people who really believed that you could get fruit really, really ripe and then make great wine out of it, where the rest of us were tending to pick things between 22.5 and 24. And the whole pay structures were based on bricks in those days. So
wait, what?
If you were a grape grower, you got incentivized by how much bricks you brought into the winery. You would get paid more for 24 bricks than you would for 22.5.
Who figured that out?
I mean, there's still contracts that are based on bricks out there, and it happened a lot in 2023 that grapes were rejected because they couldn't get, that late harvest, cold weather. People couldn't get, to the 24 bricks that they're contracted at, so fruit was getting rejected. So there's definitely, it's still like, maybe not in the same way that it was in the 80s, but it's still those remnants of bricks-based grape contracts is still out there.
The thing about it, it was so much fun to make wine then. We didn't really know what we were doing. Nobody. Maybe Dick Arrowood did.
Right.
Nobody else. And
he definitely would. He definitely would say that he did.
Our asses off. Long days, really hard, but try to act like we weren't working at all. That it was all one big party, and all the different winery crews all hung out together. We'd go drinking. We had a baseball team. We all played in a softball league. We would go to Kenwood's crush parties where Chewy or Doss would cook, and then they'd come over to Gundlach Bundschu where I was throwing parties. It was so much fun. It really was.
But I know we've talked about it before, but how many wineries were in Sonoma Valley in the middle 80s? Well,
when I got here in the late 70s, there were 7.
There were 7 wineries.
And I think when I started in 86, my count was 13.
Yeah.
And one of those was Couturi, so it's 12 and a half.
Right.
And when you guys are playing in the softball team, you playing against other wineries, or you just playing against whoever shows up in a uniform?
There was some league. I don't know, and it was at the state hospital.
Yeah.
And
that lasted until I was in.
My dad played there.
Yeah.
And there was in those days the hospital was much different because there were a lot of mildly challenged people there, and they had a farm, and people would go and buy things from the farm to support the people there. And it wasn't until Reagan kind of booted a lot of those people out, and it became much more challenged, the people
Much
that were
more
left.
severe, yeah.
So it changed. But I remember that we would play baseball, and there was one guy, and at least once in every game, he would run out and steal second base. And I mean, he'd pick it up and run away with it.
Right.
And everybody would encourage him and help him with it. Was stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
That's great. So can we go to the start of the wine patrol? Like, I know that had a lot to do with letting people know that you're supposed to have fun. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about? And
I'd been at Bundschu for, I don't know, I've been winemaker for a couple of years, 3 years, and our wine was being sold and distributed by Chateau and Estates Wine Company, which was a Seagram's division. But they had all the first growths from Bordeaux.
right.
We were the only California winery they had. And when they decided they didn't want to do that anymore, we had to get a sales manager, and I met a guy who worked for them named Jim McCullough.
Right.
Jim McCullough came in, and he's the guy who had the idea to start something called the Wine Patrol. And the idea was that wherever there was a wine crime, we would intercede and fix those things up. And it evolved into a lot of things. We just kind of called ourselves the Wine Patrol and did that.
Okay.
The primary thing was we had to sell the wine at Gundlach Bundschu. Nobody could even pronounce the winery. So
Still
McCullough,
can't.
They're still having that problem.
he came up with the thing where it's 4 words: gun, lock, bun, shoe. And we even had a little dance. So I started producing these posters, and the posters broke it down so people could learn to say it. And when I had been in the tasting room, I used to have a line I would tell people: if you can't say Gundlach Bundschu Gewürztraminer, you shouldn't be driving.
Right.
That I remember that poster being around town growing up.
Yeah.
And it's still, the like old time cop car pulling over a
Motorcycle guy.
motorcycle pulling over like an old truck, and that was the tagline on it.
Yeah, it was
black and
one of
white
Bundschu's
photo.
old cars. Mrs. Bundschu was the driver.
Okay.
Mary was
She's
there.
wearing a flower hat. And,
Yeah.
it was all local people. And that was kind of the first part. And then Bundschu and I would sit down annually and try to talk how we going to sell our wine and everything. And he said, we need to have a sales plan. And we went in, and he said, I got 5 ideas. I said, I only got 1. He said, let's hear yours first. And I said, we only sell our wine to people who think we're funny. And he said, let's go with that. And so we expanded the posters. I know while I was there, we did 22 posters. We did anything we could that we thought would be entertaining, and included as many people as we could.
Well, that sort of grew into the wine auction posters, right?
Yeah.
I remember
Ron Zach. He took
Ron Zach.
the same thing and did the same deal.
Right.
And when that started, I would get all the winemakers together to shoot the poster, and we would have a party afterwards.
Yeah.
That was part of the deal. But when I left, they changed it, and Zach would shoot individual sections and then paste it together. The wine people never partied. They never got together anymore. It was just another...
there's too many people for the throw a party.
Not really.
No, just too
God
expensive.
knows you do it
Yeah, fair
over
enough.
at the barn, you know. So it's just an attitude thing. So.
And I always heard the story that you guys would go to New Orleans and you would do your general sales meeting would be like at 1:00 in the morning after all the restaurants had closed. What was that all
wasn't
about?
It. New Orleans is my second home.
Okay.
We met a couple, and this couple he was at the distributors. The four of us, my wife and his wife and all of us, we just hit it off. And we traveled, we did all kinds of things. So I would be in New Orleans a lot. And my kid went to college there. So any excuse we had, we'd go. We had Gundlach Bundschu on every list in town. Every list. We were selling about 1,000 cases a year.
Wow.
And I was telling Mr. Jerry, I said, look, I'd really like to increase what we're selling. And he said, well, the only thing that we can do, because we're everywhere, is we got to get the wait staff behind it. So I ripped off the idea of the cellar at ball, and we started a thing called the wait staff ball. That started at 10 o'clock after the restaurant shift, and it went until 2 in the morning. And we would provide food, a band, and all the wine they wanted to drink, and some kegs of beer free for any waiters that wanted to come. The first one we did, the next weekend, one restaurant, Mr. B's, sold 36 bottles of Gundlach Bundschu Gewürztraminer. And our sales jumped to 3,000 cases a year and stayed there for 10 years.
And did you keep doing
we
the
did
parties?
that for 9 years. We even did it after I left Gundlach Bundschu. We still did a waitstaff ball. So
I mean, some Gewürztraminer and some New Orleans food.
Oh, it's match made in
some
heaven.
gumbo and some it's like a perfect
etouffee.
Perfect
Anything
combo.
fried.
Right? And just like the weather, it'd be perfect.
Yeah.
And our
go to
Gewürz
New
was
Orleans.
dry,
Yeah.
so it went perfect.
No, they still make a amazing Gewürz over there. Yeah,
And you still can't say it unless you're sober.
it's true. And even then,
And even that's tough.
Well, and 2 bottles a day, that's all we ask. Remember that photo out in front of City Hall with everybody? That was also a great one.
Yeah, I think my dad and my uncle were in that photo.
Yeah.
Well, and that was, we've got these temperance people now, and back then it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Right.
They saw that, and they came after us big time, hard. They got the police involved and all this stuff because we had our kids in it, Kids were on their way to dance class or coming out of Cub Scouts, and they were all in the poster.
yeah.
And they said,
I might have been in that poster now that I think about
You're
it.
advertising drinking. This is not good. But it was family, It's what we did. I'm sure Bart's done this too. You have kids, you put aside wine from that vintage.
Yep.
Because that was our life.
Right.
That's what we did. So,
Yeah. You're always happy when your kids are born in a good vintage.
yeah.
Right.
Right. 2019, great year for Althea.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I've drank a number of the bottles I set aside.
Aside for Dane, what year?
But I've been looking for 2007.
Okay.
But I've been
2007 was a great vintage.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of it left because everybody drinks them.
Well, and Jake Lorenzo, he wrote a thing about how to start a wine cellar and how to do that. And he said, okay, so it's traditional that a lot of people would put aside bottles when their kids are born. He said, but you need to use your wine cellar wisely. So when your kid is like 15 or 16 and starting to act out, what you do is when he screws up, you bring him in, you take him into the wine cellar, and you say, here is a bottle that I bought and put down for you. but you screwed up, so I'm going to drink it in front of you. And it's a shame you're missing out on it. It's kind of a parental thing.
Well, let's dive into Jake Lorenzo a little bit, because growing up, I knew who you were, and then started to see like the Cellar at Confidential, or what the Jake Lorenzo books would be like around my parents' house. Who is Jake Lorenzo, and how did he show up in Sonoma?
In the day, Jim Bundschu and me were as close as a winemaker and owner got. I don't know any other situation where they were that close friends. And he would always, Gundlach married a Bundschu, but all the Gundlachs died off. And he kept saying, you got to change your name to Lance Gundlach so we can be Gundlach Bundschu again. And I would say, Jim, I don't really want to be that closely affiliated with your family. And all the
shout out to the
Mexican
Bundschu's
workers
listening
would call me Lorenzo because Lance was not a thing. And it was Jacob Gundlach. And I thought, Jake Lorenzo. And it just sounded like a private eye to me.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Don Neal, who had Practical Winery magazine, he was doing a story, and I was telling him, your magazine is so boring and so dull. All the winemakers I know have a really good time, and they like to laugh and all. Why don't you have some of that? And he said, well, why don't you write it? So I started writing Jake Lorenzo columns.
And for someone like myself who has never read any of those things, like what were you writing about?
It's fictional characters who interact with real people. It all deals with winery and wine country stuff, and it's meant to be funny. And
you wrote them seasonally.
Well, at Practical Winery, there were only 6 magazines a year.
Okay.
So I wrote one for each issue, and then it was actually 20 years ago, Cyril, we were having lunch, me, Michael Coates, and Cyril Penn.
It's always good when we'd mention Cyril on the show, because then he includes us in his daily email. So how's it going, Cyril? Thanks for listening.
We're sitting having lunch, and Cyril's telling Coates, he said, this guy, Jake Lorenzo, every winemaker I talk to reads Jake Lorenzo. And I'd love to get him to come to my magazine, but I don't know who the guy is. And Coates said, I can introduce you. And Cyril said, oh, that would be great. And he said, well, he's sitting right next to you. And Cyril offered me a job, and I took it.
and Coates took 10%.
Yeah.
Nice job, Michael Coates. Oh, that's awesome.
And I just published my 6th collection of columns. So
is it
there's a lot of books
available for? We should have those here.
I also
we need the complete set.
I'd love to. I just yesterday opened my Wine Patrol website. So the website's set up where people can buy the Cutler Cellar posters that I did.
Yep.
They can get all the Jake Lorenzo books. I did an hour and 15-minute video on how to make wine at home the professional way, and there's a workbook with that. And I'm trying to work with the people at Wine Business Monthly so that all the stories I've written, the varietal focus stories, the roundtable interviews, all the miscellaneous stories are available on the website for free.
That'd be awesome.
We'll
Give us the website again so our listeners
winepatrol.com.
Awesome.
Pretty simple.
So let's circle back to Wine Patrol, because what were the wine crimes that the Wine Patrol was policing? Like what that was, I think, before
one that continues, and we have never been able to control the damn thing, is wine pricing in restaurants. You know, wine by the glass, all that stuff was just awful. And I even started a society, and people had cards, and they would go into restaurants and leave the card saying, we really enjoy the food and the service, but we can't afford your wine, you know. And what we wanted was charge whatever you want. You can mark up 3-4 times, but there should be some wines for those of us who like wine and have no money. just put a couple things in there that we can buy that are good.
Yeah.
And we gave awards and plaques to restaurants that would go along with this. But it started to take off big time. And I got lots of restaurant people calling me all kinds of names and stuff because they didn't like what was going on. And then I had a bunch of people trying to take it over because they saw it as a thing that could make money.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that, so I just kind of shut that down. There are a lot of things that I tried, and, you know, I lose interest quickly. So it's like the cellar rat ball and the, you know, few years
It's not
of
so
that.
much you lose interest, but something sounds to me like something else attracts your attention.
Could be. I remember when I would, because of the Davis professors that I had over, whenever they had a student that they thought was really sharp and wanted to get in the wine business, they'd call me. And I tend to hire them at Gundlach Bundschu. So they'd come in and we'd interview, and then they'd be working for maybe a month. And all they wanted to know was, what kind of yeast are you doing? What temperature are you fermenting at? How does this work? And then after 2 months, they say, hey, do we have a health program here? Do I get vacation days? Towards the end of my being a winemaker there, the interview would all be about how many vacation days do I get? What kind of bonus structure is there? How much sick leave do I get? And 2 months later, they go, we make Zinfandel?
Yeah.
And, you know, that change in attitude kind of pushed me out the door.
Yeah.
I couldn't stay too long after that.
But there was life for you in winemaking after, because you had your own winery.
Well,
and you were helping some people make some wine.
I had made really good friends with Rusty Staub, the baseball player. And he was huge raising money for charities.
Right.
The biggest thing he did was after 9/11, he raised over $30 million for widows and kids. So we had a wine called Relentless. And we were making a Merlot from Marcelo Hernandez's vineyard,
Yep.
a little 2-acre vineyard. Marcelo had been my vineyard manager the whole time I was at Gundlach Bundschu. And he had a row of eucalyptus trees on the west side of his vineyard. The wind would blow through those and drop the oil and all that stuff. So his Merlot was kind of like Joe Height's Cabernet, but it was Merlot.
Yeah.
It had that eucalyptus mint character. And the wine was pricey, but all the profits went to Rusty's charities. And we did that for 10 years. Speaking of which, today is Rusty's birthday,
Oh,
April 1st. He died about 5 years ago.
okay.
So,
I got to meet him. He was at the winery when you were making those wines at Benziger for a little while. You brought him around a couple times. The Benzigers would look at him and was like, he's a Yankee.
yeah.
Right.
It was the Mets.
It was
He was not a Yankee.
No, he was not a Yankee, but he was from New York. Right.
Yeah.
What was the name of that label that you were making wine under?
Relentless.
It was called Relentless.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, we only did 300 cases, and I had left Gundlach Bundschu at that time, so it gave me something to do, and that worked out. And I'd been making this for 27 years or something, Guerrilla Vino.
Yeah,
Maybe
let me try that.
And,
We started with the Ojai. Finally, Brian got his hands on the Ojai Mountain Vineyard.
Your dad showed
White
up
blend.
the other day for Eric's last day here. Your dad brought some of the Ojai wines, and so I got to try the Rousson Grenache Blanc Pickpool blend, and then I think there's a bottle of Syrah in the cellar, and there's a red blend too. Yeah, Jasmine and I have been dying to try the Ojai wines, and that's, I don't know what you think about that white. If you want to talk about it, it has such texture in that wine. We tried another wine, based almost the same blend, same vintage from a different winery that was like completely different. It was really like super clean and crisp, and this like has I want to see what this is like in 5 years.
Well, you know, a unique, spectacular vineyard site, and Eric Bradley making the wine should do well, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's delicious.
Yeah.
So, Lance, talk a little bit about the spirit of Guerrilla Vino a little bit.
Well, I'm a winemaker, and I want to make wine. So when Guerrilla Vino started, I got about 15 friends, and they would give me money so I could buy grapes and some equipment. And I was doing about 2.5 or 3 tons of grapes in 500-pound lots, and taking it all the way through aging and bottling it, and then we divide it all up. I've been doing that for 30 years.
You had all those half barrels.
Yeah. I used to have a row of 10 of them. Now I just have 2.
Okay.
Because my back won't permit me to do that anymore. But I really like drinking Pinot Noir in particular, but good wine, and I can't afford what it costs. So the bulk of what I'm drinking these days is like Côte d'Arones and Malbecs from Argentina and some Italian stuff that I can get. But if I want to drink Pinot Noir, I pretty much have to make it.
Yeah.
And where do you get the fruit from?
This particular one comes from Melissa Moravec, who was the winemaker at Carneros Creek for 18 years. And her partner is Kurt, and he was several places in Acacia for many, many years. And I just celebrated the 30th consecutive vintage of grapes from that vineyard.
Wow.
And they have a bunch of different clones. So sometimes we'll do a blend of clones. Sometimes we'll do individual clones. It changes all the time.
And where's the vineyard?
Carneros.
Carneros.
And what else do you make besides, or do you only make Pinot?
These days, I only make Pinot.
Yeah.
But before that, I made everything. Pinots. And at Gundlach Bundschu, we made 16 different varieties and like 21 different wines every year.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of experience with different things.
Yeah.
Didn't know what I was doing, but I have a lot of experience.
It's the wavy gravy.
Yeah.
How do you get good judgment? Experience.
Yeah.
How do you get experience?
Poor judgment.
Bad judgment. Exactly.
No, this is delicious. How do you just a brief little walkthrough of how you make this wine?
Pick the grapes into lug boxes, take them back to my little winery. I have a little mechanical crusher that I have on a stand. I put 2 heavy-duty plastic trash cans underneath, crush into those. I have a ramp so I can drag them up into my garage. I put a sheet over the top of them, wait for native yeast to start fermenting. And after it ferments and gets to dryness, I drag the trash can back up to a press it into 5-gallon carboys, let it sit for a day or 2, and then lift those up to a ladder and siphon them into my barrels.
Wow. And you're doing this by yourself?
Sometimes I have people helping, but usually it's by myself. Yeah.
Wow.
And lifting 5-gallon carboys up about 5 feet high is
heavy.
why my back doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. And then you let it sit in the barrel until you just keep tasting it until you decide, all right, it's time to bottle.
Sort of, but more often than not, I have to bottle it before the next vintage because I need that barrel.
Right.
So I got into the regimen of 10 to 12 months in oak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got friends that give you barrels every now and then?
No, I only buy new barrels. I never use used barrels.
Really?
Don't trust them.
But you don't buy new barrels every year.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Let's say like when I had 10 barrels, I'd buy maybe 20-25% new and just rotate through. Now I get one new one about every 3rd or 4th year.
And when you say you don't trust them, you
Bacteriologically.
right.
Yeah, whatever you got, I don't want.
Yeah.
And then there was a tequila book.
Good judgment comes from experience, right?
Exactly.
And in 93, right about as I had quit as winemaker, but was still the general manager, and I was looking for things to do. I'd gone to part-time there. I went to Mexico And I've always loved tequila. And I thought, you know what would be cool? I'll write a story about tequila. And when I got to Mexico, I realized I didn't know anything about tequila. And that story turned into a book. And it was called The Tequila Lover's Guide to Mexico. And it was sort of the most authoritative book on tequila that had been written in English. Way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time. And there were 3 sections. One was how tequila is made. One, I had come up with a whole way to taste tequila. And then I had imagined tequila would turn into like wine country and people would go there and visit all the factories. That didn't happen because they don't support one another in the tequila business like we in the wine business do. But I had the book and I sold over 15,000 copies, but could not get anyone to give me money to update it. I couldn't get a publisher interested. I was publishing my own. And while it did turn a profit, it took me like 6 years to make $7,000 on a $25,000 investment. I said, well, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
So I didn't go back into that.
So is that book still available, though?
No, it's out of print, long out of print.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, I've not had to buy any tequila since then because people keep sending me tequila and asking what I think.
Right. How do you taste tequila? What's the right way?
Slowly.
Well,
Yeah, well, it's not
slightly.
It's not that so much, but we actually came up with descriptors in the way that you have wine, and
Yeah.
we had rating sheets that we could do. It was really interesting and a great way to taste tequila. We tasted 300 tequilas and 80 mezcals for that book.
Wow. Because I feel like now it's sort of come around where people are appreciating mezcal and tequila and treating it almost closer to a cognac or a scotch than they used to. I mean, when I was coming up, it was shots. All you did was take shots or make margaritas.
Well, and those damn slammers where they'd mix the tequila with ginger ale.
Yeah, pop
Slam it.
Man,
Yeah.
slam it down in front of you. Yeah.
I never drank that.
That's one of those things that you stop drinking when you turn 21, I think.
Yeah.
When you get thrown out of enough bars.
Don't tell the Mothers Against Drunk Driving I said that.
It's like Mexico has always had a place in my heart, and lately, and we're going to stop going pretty soon because it's changed so much, but we go to the Valle de Guadalupe, just outside Ensenada, which is where about 85% of Mexican wine is produced. And if you haven't been, I recommend going.
Yeah.
You can stay in Ensenada. It's a 30-minute drive. But the wines are improving. It's the restaurants and the food that are killer.
Yeah.
Really, really good. So,
Yeah, and I had a friend who was recently there, and it was his same thing. It said the wines are getting better, but the food and the restaurants and the architecture, he said, are amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. We had a couple bottles of Valle de Guadalupe Sauvignon Blanc this last week.
While you're down there.
Yeah, and absolutely delicious. Like really well made, not sweet, balanced. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
All right. Jesse dropped off this bottle. You guys want to try
Hey,
this?
let's try the Sky Syrah. Which is, with all love and respect to the Olds family, it's guerrilla vino, slightly, made up there on the mountain in a off the grid, gravity fed winery. 2017, this was the last year for all the old vines.
Right.
Because a lot of it burned in the fires. So this was in barrel or maybe in fermenters while the property burned around it. The house, Lori's house burned, the vineyard burned, but the old barn that they made the wine in did not.
Maya Kama's involved in this?
Yes. So this is Maya Kamis's family. Yeah, her dad and sister. This is it's one of those. It's Napa Valley. It's Mount Veeder, but you get there from Cavedale Road, so they're Sonoma Valley kids, but live in Napa County. So they can sell it for. They don't, but they should sell it for 40% more because it says Napa Valley on the label, right?
So Lance, Is there anything going on in the wine business right now that excites you, that you're like energized about, or look at it and think that's a good thing? And then I'd ask the question also, is there anything you're real cynical about?
I'm cynical about rich people starting brands that may or may not be legit and making it harder for those of us who are struggling to make good wine and have for most of our lives to compete. That really annoys me a lot. If they come in, celebrity, whatever, and respect what's gone on before and meet the people and learn how to take care of us, that would be okay. I also have a real difficult time with how expensive everything's got. Yeah. We have people that stay at the house. They want to visit wine country, and they go to a couple wine tastings, and they're out a couple $100 in just tasting fees. And I'm sure there's reasons for all this, but it's very difficult. I couldn't afford it. I got out. I kept quitting jobs before I made any money. So we don't have much. We live fine. We have a great life, but we don't have income that we can go spend. And whatever income we have, we save until we can go on a trip someplace. So that's one thing. As far as being excited, I love meeting people in the business. You talk to all these natural winemakers, and I'm not a big fan of most natural wines, but the enthusiasm that those people have reminds me of what it used to be like. That they don't do a little more work researching what's gone on before historically in terms of how wine is made and what the trade-offs are and different stuff is a little sad to me. But that could be something that turns into something. And I try to keep up with that. But I just love their enthusiasm. There's Jack Sporer over at Magnolia. What a nice guy. He's really helps people and does stuff like that. I like him a lot.
Yeah. He's the day after this episode airs, he will be getting married to his fiancée Saskia, who works at Hamel in the vineyards. Uh-huh. So shout out to Jack.
Yep.
He's in the middle of the week of his wedding. He was sending me an email first thing this morning about we make a bunch of our wine over there at Magnolia. So he's a hardworking guy who definitely is looking out for everybody else, for sure.
Yeah. So what are you saying, that you loaded a bunch of work on him before?
Oh, absolutely. Just fuck him and his wedding. We got work orders about 3 inches. I've been on vacation. It's time for him to get to work.
Well, Lance, does that also kind of that might be a good way to lead into the roundtables that you've been doing for Wine Business Monthly also that Sam was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, thoroughly, I was able to, invited to sit in on 2 of them, which I thought were both great interviews and conversations with interesting folks in the wine business.
When I started working for Wine Business Monthly, my goal was to get as much work so I could get paid as possible. So I came out with 2 series. One is called Varietal Focus, where I take a grape variety. We take 3 regions known for the variety and 3 wineries from each of those vineyards or regions. So I have 9 winemakers all making Cabernet from different places. And we start by saying, what is it you're trying to do stylistically? They tell us. And then we go into great detail of what you're doing in the vineyard and what you're doing in the winery to achieve that style. I've done 26 of those. Wow. The roundtable came about because when I left the business, I would call up my friends and say, hey, man, let's go out for a 3-hour lunch. And they go, oh, man, I got to do inventory, or I've got a bottling date coming up, or, something, which was ridiculous. So I would invite
the guy
them
not
over
in the industry anymore
and say, okay, we're going to discuss how you sell wine when you're on the road. And I get 3 people over who knew this. They'd come to my house. I'd serve them a 3-course lunch, and we'd drink wine. And then I would turn on a tape recorder for an hour and a half. I'd turn that into a story. But my whole goal was for those 3 people to not return to work. That they'd sit around the house and we'd drink wine on my porch, and which is what we used to do in the old day. So that was the round tables. I've probably done over 60 of those. And it's great information because there's all kinds of subjects. We did one on drought with you.
We did one on drought and with Morgan Twain Peterson, and I'm forgetting the other guy who works for a big vineyard company. I can't remember.
He was the guy that wrote for Wine Business Monthly.
Yeah, that's right.
He really knew his stuff.
Yeah, he was smart. I just mostly kept my mouth shut on that one. I mostly kept my mouth shut on both of them.
But again, that almost goes back to when I had the UC Davis guys over. It's an incredible way to learn stuff. When you get, and I always like being with people smarter than me, and then ask them the questions, and they give you the answers, and it's hardly ever what you thought it was going to be, but it's always a great way to learn. That still excites me.
Yeah, awesome.
The magazine doesn't let me do very many of them anymore.
Right.
But, I'm trying to start a thing now, since hamburgers in the Valley start at $16, which I think is nuts. I go and I get these packs that's like 1.33 pounds of grass-fed beef, and I can make 4 really nice-sized hamburgers. And then I grill them, I have buns, and I'm going to start doing 4 people at a time just to eat burgers on my porch when the weather gets good. So I'm going to have Charlie Tolbert, different, and just hang out because we don't see each other as much as we should. That's what I like to do.
Will you talk about this sort of shift in the social community aspect of the Sonoma wine world, and kind of when that started to happen, and maybe why it changed from the way it was, when you were at Gun Bun and thereafter, and kind of how
I may not be
now.
the right guy to do this, but to answer that question. But for me, it changed when it became about money. Yeah. It used to be about wine, and nobody was making any money. As things went on, and tourists started coming, and people found this, and wine became what it's turned into, where everybody's drinking it. That brought money into the situation, and different people reacted in different ways to that. It might be that you're forced to do things to make money just to survive because that everything costs more. It might be because you're greedy and you want to make as much money as you can. And in doing so, you treat people poorly. That's another thing that was very, very important to me, and it goes back to when I was in college and working with the United Mexican American students and the Black Studies students. I had incredible respect for the workers. And we built a 120-foot mural at Gundlach Bundschu and painted it to honor the workers. We threw parties for the workers. We did everything we could to give credit to anybody who was working in our field. It's great to see that so many Hispanic people now own vineyards and wineries. I think that's great. I just went to a tasting in Napa last month of the Association of African American Vintners, and they're starting up, and they're really different. They come at it in a whole different way. They're very media savvy, and it was interesting to meet all those people. That's another thing I would be enthused about.
Yeah.
However, less than 1% of people who own or make wine are black. Yeah. And 68%, I think it's 68 or more, can't get bank loans, and they're privately funded from relatives or friends or stuff like that. So it's got a long way to go before it's equitable.
Redlining in the wine business.
Yeah. But what do you think about? Is that a fair explanation of what's happening?
I think so. I think certainly once wineries started being purchased by large corporations, was a shift in going towards what you're saying, where
Quarterly profits,
having to report those things certainly change things. I mean, we have wineries in the valley who have, been purchased, and we've seen how it's changed them. And, the first thing the company comes in and says, we're not going to change anything. And then it's just a matter of how
the
long
next day they
wait.
change everything.
Right. Or they wait 4 or 5 years and then they start changing things. Yeah. And
the old dynamic was traditional and was brought over from Europe. So people would get into the wine business with the expectations and hope that they could pass this on to their kids, that their kids would take interest and they would do this and like that. But then around the 90s, I was meeting people who got into it with a whole different model. And their model was, we don't want to own anything. We want no brick or mortar. We'll buy some barrels. We'll rent space. We'll use custom crush facilities. We'll make these wines. We'll get a wine club. We'll charge a lot of money. We'll donate to charities so we can meet the hoi polloi of these people. And as soon as we can, we're going to sell this winery for as many millions as we can get. No. And that became a new ethic. That changed things a lot. And then a lot of the wineries who had been here for a long time, family-owned wineries, realized our kids don't want to have anything to do with this. And they were kind of stuck. I can't keep doing this. I'm getting too old. And so there's all these factors that, get involved.
Yeah. Remember when Tegan Pasalak said to us that as a young guy growing up in Napa, that it was really hard for him to compete when it was something like 30% of the wineries over in Napa, he said, weren't even profitable. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were, people came in with money. They were ego projects, a bunch of doctors getting together. Nothing against doctors. We love doctors.
And now doctors can't even afford to do that, right? I mean, and now it's fintech and private equity and I mean, I remember when it was retired airline pilots. This was even before the doctors. Right. It was like the airline pilots were the people in the economic bracket of coming to Sonoma and buying land and planting vineyards and selling, maybe starting a winery, maybe just selling the grapes. And that was like the thing. And, I don't think there's many people who are retiring on their United Airlines pensions who are doing that anymore around here,
Well, and Kenwood, it was started on, not a huge budget, I'm sure. No. They had good loans from their bank that they were with. But what they did to acquire land is they put it together, a group of doctors that, bought a vineyard, and eventually they bought those doctors out, and then they owned, 100 acres of land planted, but that took them, that was over time.
And see, that's a thing that I miss a lot. There were so many seminal, important people that are kind of being forgotten. And at Kenwood, for example, John Sheila, he was a great guy.
Still is.
He did all kinds of great things, but he's quiet now.
Yes,
you don't
he is.
See him much anymore.
No, you're right. And I've actually tried to get him on this show to talk about that because both of his brother-in-laws have passed, and John just says, I don't have anything to say, Bart, and he goes, it's better off you guys just talk about it and remember it and be respect of it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Sam's dad, essential key guy, and he trained with Joe Miami, right? Mm. And so there's Joe Miami, and there's a whole tree because there's Joe Votek. There's Bernie Mosier. All these guys who were kind of taught by Joe Miami. And I used to buy grapes from Joe Miami. And when he'd come with the sample, he'd bring a used strawberry plastic basket. And the berries would be in there, the grapes. And then we'd crush those, and that's how we'd get our test. And he did that all the time.
They probably asked for the basket back when you're done. Yeah,
of course he did. Of course.
Well, that's why Tegan said he kind of moved over to Lodi, and I think people are looking. If you're looking to make wine and you're younger, maybe you're looking at Columbia Valley in Washington, or even moving back to Texas. Like we've known friends that do going to Virginia and starting a vineyard. Because things have just gotten, you get priced out here.
Yeah, it's another thing that Jake Lorenzo wrote about. It's every wine country place goes through the same development stage. They start just with nothing, trying to figure it out. The wines slowly get better. That attracts restaurants and people like that. And then that attracts business. And then business starts buying things up. And you just have to figure where in the continuum you want to live. Yeah. And then go from place to place. Right now, Valle de Guadalupe's one. I went to Idaho a few years back. It was cool. The restaurants were just starting. I like it when the wines are getting better. The restaurants are opening, but the celebrities and the money and the corporations haven't come in yet.
Yeah.
That's when I like to be in a situation. Yeah. And they're all over the world.
And we're watching that happen right now in like Paso, where now the corporations are there buying up the vineyards and the brands. We're sort of at that next stage there. The restaurants have been great. The wine is, obviously some of the best in the world, and now it's Constellation and Treasury.
Going down. We've got friends we've been friends with for over 15 years, and they started 25 years ago in Paso, and they said they can't even get into a local restaurant because there's so many people on weekends. It's just impossible.
Yeah. You try to get a reservation on a local restaurant in Sonoma on a weekend anymore.
Yeah. And you gotta get a bank loan to go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, stick with a burger and a glass of Coteron. You can get out under $50 a
I like
head.
that. You're sort of creating your own reality. Invite some people over, make some burgers, and
almost everybody who comes enjoys it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, when I go out to eat in a restaurant, which I don't do much anymore, but when I used to, if the chef blew me away, I'd go in the kitchen, I'd buy beers for everybody, and then I'd invite the chef over to my house for dinner. Wow. I'll cook for you. And it'd usually take a couple visits because they just thought I was some whack case. But after a while, they'd check around, and other chefs would say, "Oh, no, he's serious. He'll cook for you. He can cook."
I'll attest to that. Those lunches at the round tables have been great.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's another way to meet people.
So can you reveal who Chewy is?
Chewy is a fictional character that I invented.
Okay.
The Burrito Palace is a fictional restaurant that does not exist.
Okay, so there was there's inspiration, but it's not any individual place or person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of the columns reference Chewy.
There's characters who reappear a lot.
Yeah.
Gerald Asher, who I think is one of the greatest wine writers ever, very lyrical, and he was one of my readers early on. And I gave him the first Jake Lorenzo book, and he contacted me. He said, "Lance, I know these are friends of yours and everything, but if this guy Chewy Palacio is a lawyer who graduated Berkeley, he wouldn't talk in the vernacular that you have him speaking." And I said, "Gerald, I make all these people up. They don't really exist." He said, "Oh, well, then you're a better writer than I had given you credit for."
That's awesome.
And I got Rusty to do the introduction of that first book. And I sent him the manuscript, and he called me up. He said, "Lance, we've been friends for 20 years. I didn't know you knew all those words."
When you see tasting sheets, like when you read a magazine and they read about the wine and it gives descriptions of the wine, do you laugh a little bit at some of the...
I don't read those.
Yeah.
They become repetitive, and
yeah.
That was another thing Gerald told me. We had a dinner at my house with Gerald Asher and Bob and Molly Sessions. Okay? And Gerald spent the night. And our house was so small, we had no beds. We just had futons that you'd open up, So he's sleeping on the floor the next morning. And we were having coffee, and I said, "Gerald, I notice you don't take notes or anything." how do you remember the wines? He said, well, before I go to bed or when I get up in the morning, I write what you served. And that reminds me what the wines were. Huh. If I try to write down descriptions of wines, they all start to sound the same. Yeah. But if I can link them with an event or something in particular, then I can remember the wine better.
Right.
And I thought that was a great trick.
Putting people in a place. I like that. I remember we were, it was like last year when we were reading descriptions of someone who, they weren't saying the fruit profiles. They would say, this wine was like walking on the beach at sunset on blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, this is a new way to go about things. Yeah, well, it was about evoking emotion.
That's a new thing they're teaching writers, It's kind of weird.
So is Jake Lorenzo still writing columns?
Oh, yeah. I just came up with my 6th book a couple months ago. All the Jake Lorenzo's books started with surveillance. There was cold surveillance.
That's right.
Further surveillance, mature surveillance. And then I came up with a book called Final Surveillance because I just was sick of trying to come up with titles. But the new book is called Back from the Dead.
Right.
And it's got me in, what do you call it? Day of the Dead face makeup coming out of my cellar. And a lot of those columns, are based around COVID. And the Final Surveillance book, a lot of those are based around the fire and what happened in 2017 here. No. So, they're all contemporary. And I think together, taken as a whole, it's the best history of what's gone on in Sonoma Valley available. And it's funny.
Right.
They are funny.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And each one's only 1,000 words, so you can pick it up and put it down. One other thing you just need to touch on is one of the things we did at Gundlach Bundschu is the Wine Patrol. We came up with events. And the first one was we hijacked the Napa Wine Train. When we first moved here and that train started, everybody we know in Napa hated it because they had track right-of-ways on their property, and when he was going to run the train, they had to improve those to make them work. And they had to pay for that, not the guy. So I put together 12 people. We put on black velvet capes that were designed and sewn by Norton Buffalo's first wife, Kristen Anaker. And we put on masks. We bought tickets to get on the train, and then we passed out free Sonoma Valley wine with leaflets that said, drink Sonoma, and you can still afford to send your kids to college. Throw out that Napa swill. And when the train slowed as it passed Mondavi on the way back, we exited the movie train, which turned out to be a federal crime. We didn't know that at the time. So that became a thing. And then later on, when Richard Branson had the first Virgin airline flight direct from London to San Francisco, he filled the plane with writers and photographers from all over Europe. One day in their 5 days that he was giving them in California, they went to wine country, but it was all Napa Valley. And Anthony Diaz Blue was the host. So I got invited as Jake Lorenzo, and their last stop was at Domaine Carnero Sparkling Wine. As they were getting ready to go back to the city, I got on the bus, put on my cape and mask, had a helicopter drop down out of the sky, eye to eye with the bus driver as he crossed county line into Sonoma. All these people came out on motorcycles and horseback, and we hijacked those buses to Gundlach Bundschu, telling them they had spent a whole day in Napa and would never appreciate wine again if they didn't go through a cure. And we would give them the cure at Gundlach Bundschu. It was the greatest thing ever. But that was the day Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died, and none of that made any news. Right. But Richard Branson introduced me to his parents and said, that was great. We really appreciate it. And he said nothing but good stuff about Sonoma Valley ever since.
Oh, in this day and age.
Right.
You can't do anything. One day we had a party at the winery and there were maybe 60 people and we loaded up in cars and we all went to Mustard's on a Saturday night. We walked in at 8 o'clock. We had blue stem glasses, which we had created for Sonoma Valley. We gave everybody in the restaurant a glass. We poured free Sonoma Valley wine. We took a case of wine in for the staff in the kitchen, and we chanted, "We reserve the right to party each and every night. You can't prosecute us because we reserve the right." And we went in and out in less than 10 minutes. And there were at least 10 Napa Valley winemakers giving us booze and all that kind of stuff. We would just think of stuff and go do it.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. It's awesome. Wow. Well, thank you, Lance. Tell people how to get a hold of everything. I know it's winepatrol.com.
Winepatrol.com. It just opened yesterday. It may still have glitches. I don't know. But, you can go in there and find it, and I will be expanding it if the magazine allows me to, because I'd like to get all those articles where somebody can see them. The reason I do the Jake Lorenzo books is none of my friends read that magazine. They're not in the business. No. So every 4 or 5 years, I collect the articles, and then they can see what Jake's doing.
And then your writings could also be found in Wine Business Monthly for those people that subscribe or are in the industry.
You can go onto their site and type in varietal focus and get all the varietal focus things. You can type in roundtable, but I'm trying to get that linked to my page so that when people come in, they can see that.
And people can buy the book anywhere? Go to Amazon, buy it directly from you?
Pretty much have to get it through me.
Okay.
I tried to get it on Amazon, and I hit the wrong button, and now every time I do it, they want to charge me a monthly fee, which I don't want to pay, and I can't get rid of it. I'm not adept at a lot of this technology.
And that's funny that you mentioned the temperance movement, and I think that was the newest cover.
That's the cover of the Wine Business Monthly.
Wine Business Monthly was about the temperance movement, which I just thought was, I don't think I've heard that word. I thought it was something from 100 years ago. And to hear that pop up again,
it's back, big time.
Very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got my copy of the issue, but I haven't cracked it yet. But
there's some pretty interesting stuff. There's 2 articles written by a lady that go into that.
Cool.
Shout out to this 2017 Sky Syrah that Jesse dropped off.
It's delicious.
Yeah.
That's natural wine, great bottle of wine. And I know that if you go to their website, they got lots of wine available, and it's as old school gets around here.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a good bottle for this show.
Yeah. And Lance, your Pinot is delicious.
Yes,
but you see what it says on my label.
Yes.
Not for sale at any price.
Right.
Any price, exactly. I love that.
But it's delicious. It's really well balanced and total varietal, screams Pinot, which there are Pinots out there that don't scream Pinot.
Yeah, they scream crush.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Awesome. Anybody got any shout outs?
Well, Bart, now when people drive through Glen Ellen, they know where you're at.
They do.
You got your sign.
Yep.
Right?
Signs look great.
They do look good on Instagram anyway. I got to go over there and see it.
You started, I was, truth be told, I'm sitting on the toilet this morning and I was scrolling through Instagram, and you start some Instagram live videos, but then one lasted 4 seconds.
Yeah.
And the other one was
I was trying to do something that I could record and leave up, and I just wasn't happy with them, so I just deleted them quickly because it didn't appear that anybody was really watching them.
I was.
Yeah. Well, that's nice. I'm glad to see you were thinking of me. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. The signs look awesome. I'm really excited now that spring break's back behind us and Dane's back to school. Now it's time to start getting some traffic.
And it looked like Steve Waymeyer helped you out while you were away.
He did. He drove by and said, the signs look great. I go, send me a picture. He goes, oh, I didn't stop and take a picture. And so then he went back by.
Oh, he wasn't like, I thought you had him like working the tasting room while you were gone or something.
No, you know what?
Put that guy to work. What does he do?
Today, you know what? Shout out to Steve Waymeyer. Today is his last day of work. He and his wife Dana are both retiring from their jobs today.
Congratulations.
So congratulations to them. So he says he's going to start spending more time working in his own vineyard.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, it's super exciting. So reservations are up on the website. Make some reservations.
What's your tasting fee out of curiosity?
Right now, if you make a donation to my Chef Cycle fundraising, free tastings.
There you go.
Chef Cycle is less than 30 days away. Tick tock. But the plan is $45. Okay. And then, refundable on purchase of a few bottles. Yeah. So.
One-on-one with the winemaker.
In the tank. Get tanked with Dan Sellers.
Yep. So, and other than that, that's about it for me. Mm-hmm. I know you guys must like the summer schedule.
Summer schedule's coming together. Well, June 1st is the Moon Mountain District Reach for the Moon event up in Monte Rosso. The masterclass tasting, and then sort of a masterclass, and then the grand tasting, and then we're hosting the after party at the Fairmont with Tony Saunders. And because we're gluttons for punishment around here, our first Vinyl Sunday will be the next day. I'm sure there'll be lots of Moon Mountain District bottles still around from that.
Somebody thought that'd be a good idea.
I think all of us.
We're just too dumb.
We're too dumb.
We forget about last year and go, that sucked.
It's fine. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
Andy Kabak of Vetiver is DJing that. And then we got some more shows coming June 23rd at the barn, October 6th at the barn. Stanley Mouse Appreciation Day is August 4th, I think. First Sunday in August. And so Stan was actually making a poster for that. We went out and saw him. So he's making a poster. We'll probably sell the posters that day. So that'll be good. And I'm sure we'll come up with some other stuff. We're going to do a dinner this summer with Laurel Glenn at Songbird Parlor. I think date TBD. Yeah. Across the street from you.
Yeah.
So, we'll be busy. Hospice Daron and the Tulsa Philbrook Museum wine event coming up at the end of this month. We might be going to Aspen Food and Wine.
Whoa!
Yeah. So we're no rest for the weary or the wicked.
Shout out to Eric Clausen, his wife, Holly. Sad to have him leaving Sonoma, but on to new adventures back in Virginia, right?
Virginia, yeah.
Yep, they're probably driving now. So
got a baby, they got a dog.
Yep.
Decamping to Virginia. That's where she's from, or maybe? Or?
Yeah, well, I think she's actually North Carolina, but there's family close by, and I think that was the majority of the motivation for that. So it's sad to have him go. I know, he was working on converting his family's vineyard, and we'll have to see where that goes.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But, he was a huge part of Enterprise Vineyards, too.
Exactly, yeah.
He was, running the sheep and all about the biodynamic and organic practices and making compost tea and doing all the stuff. So hopefully he takes some of that and to Virginia and starts.
Oh, I think
I think spreading the gospel.
Yeah, I think he, with his background and her background working at Hansel, they could probably do a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah,
so good luck to them.
Keep your eye out and keep shouting out Brett and Kristen George.
Yeah,
they're keep going through it. I had a little text message with him yesterday. He was drinking the 2016 Steel Plow Homage, which is apparently in a great place.
It's so freaking good right now. Big love to those guys.
Yeah. So they're trucking along, and
Dave Hayes.
Dave Hayes was here. That's right.
He was hoping to see Bart, but Bart was drinking tequila on a beach.
Yeah, he went and took a picture. They took pictures out in front of the tank, and we just weren't able to hook it up. So.
Yeah.
But they had the ultimate podcast tour going on when I said, "Where are you guys going today?" And I wanted to quit and go with them. It
Just take a day off. You could go.
They were having a good time.
He was up in Mendocino County and went to Petroncelli, and like sent me this picture of the Redwood Tank Farm.
Cool.
So that was cool. So anyway, yeah, Dave, sorry missed you.
Yeah. You were drinking tequila, I was drinking rum, and
Yeah.
everybody was here drinking wine.
Right.
Selling wine. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, just what you were saying, now I got to go do inventory. I wish I could sit here at this table and finish these bottles of wine, but it's now what is it? It's the 1st.
April 1st.
Yeah.
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks,
Lance.
Thanks, Jake
Appreciate
Lorenzo, for stopping by.
Yeah. The legend.
The legend of Jake Lorenzo. It lives on. It's back from the dead.
Yeah.
All right. Subscribe, review, tell your friends, but only if they're cool. Oh. Curry, you're in the way.